Good afternoon. Did you all have a good weekend? Some time to rest, to do other fun things? Good, good. Today we're going to talk about our responsibility as food managers in serving safe food. What do we need to do so that our customers are not subjected to the problems of a foodborne illness? And what do we have to do ourselves? And what do we have to teach our employees as to the kind of health behaviors that they need to follow in the day in and day out aspects of their work? I have a book here that our students use. This is called Serve Safe, which is a manager's responsibility for maintaining safe food. And all managers of food in the United States need to have an equivalent course like this, and so they will get a certificate after taking an examination.
Here also we have the same.
Yeah, and that I really encourage you to do if you're not doing that already, at least from the point that you would begin a management responsibility in a healthcare facility. So we're going to be looking at Chapter 8 in our textbook, along with information from the Serve Safe Essentials from the National Restaurant Association in the United States. In terms of, again, the universal understanding, things that are just so overwhelming that we've got to make certain that we are following. They're overwhelming from the point of view that they are so essential. And that is hand washing and control of time-temperature relationships as it relates to bacterial contamination and influence in terms of the food that is being served. Then our other responsibility as managers is to control and to monitor the sanitation, the maintenance, and the way that if there are any risk-associated activities that need to be managed, and there are plenty of those. Are you familiar with the term risk management? No? Are there any risks that we run as far as operating a food system? Risk management, then, is working to reduce those risks or eliminate those risks so that we are not subjected to a foodborne illness outbreak within our facility. And so the responsibility that we each have as far as in food systems management is making certain that we are eliminating to the highest degree possible any of the problems that would be associated in providing food. So as a manager, you have the overall responsibility to create an environment for both your employees and for your customers that they are not going to be subjected to any type of a foodborne illness. And so the things that you need to know, hopefully things that you already know, but the things that you need to clearly communicate to your employees on an annual basis. You need to have continual updates reminding them of the way that they should act in the providing of food. So, good afternoon. Hello. Welcome. Good.
I think I have a meeting or something outside.
That's fine. So the areas that we're going to talk about this afternoon and to work with have to do with personal hygiene, safe food preparation, cleaning and sanitizing, as well as safe chemical handling of the food service environment. I'm going to start out with the very basic. How do you wash your hands? Do you wash your hands? Have you washed your hands really today?
Yes, we hope so.
I hope so, yes. I was teaching this same information in a class in Slovakia a few years ago. And one of the things that I said was that, you wet your hands with hot, warm water and with hot running water, not hot warm, hot running water. Use soap and then rub your hands together for 20 seconds. Well, how many people have a second hand on their watch? And good. But do you watch it as you're washing your hands?
No, I will count until I will wash.
Yes, that's good. And so what I suggested was that they sing Happy Birthday 2 times while they were washing their hands. And so by doing that, that will take about 20 seconds, or maybe just a little bit more. And the room that we're in was similar to this, but back in the back corner was a restroom. And so people could go and use that as necessary. And an individual went in there and then came out, but we did not hear the sound of running water. And so there was a whole group of people in the back that started singing Happy Birthday. Just as a gentle reminder that it is important to wash your hands after using the toilet. I have seen statistics, and I hope that they are not true, but I'm afraid they are, that particularly men are very, very poor in terms of washing their hands after using the toilet. And that, I think, is something that really needs to be corrected. So no matter what gender, no matter what you have done, it's important to wash your hands. How often do you need to wash your hands? Mm-hmm.
As often as needed.
As often as needed. I like that answer. What is there about our environment that's going to create a need to wash our hands?
Handling, anything, different materials.
Hi. Rubbing your hand through your hair. Picking something up off the floor. What about wearing gloves? Won't that take care of a lot of the problem? No? Yes?
On a daily basis?
On a daily basis, yeah. One of the things that I have observed is that a lot of people feel that if they have gloves on, they have these magic things that are on their hands, that they no longer need to follow the convention of washing their hands. But we need to wash our hands and then put gloves on, and then realize that we have gloves on and not touch any part of our body, not picking anything up off the floor. If there's a hole in the glove, take off your gloves, wash your hands again, and put on new gloves. So I think it's important that we remember that when we have gloves on, we don't touch anything other than the food that we were working at, whether it be contaminated food, food that has not been cooked, or food that has been cooked. And certainly between those two processes of handling raw vegetables, raw meats, whatever, and then a cooked product, we want to make certain that we are not contaminating or cross-contaminating any of the food or utensils or equipment that we are using. So, how are you going to clearly communicate this need to your employees? And to get them to do it on a many times a day basis. Any ideas? Have you seen this powder that will glow in the dark? And so if you use a black light, do you know what black light is? It will show all the places that you have touched. And wherever you have touched, you have also contaminated. And so you put it on your hands, and then after an hour or so, not even that long, you look under black light and see where all your hands have been. Probably not a good thought, but at the same time, it is a very clear way to communicate to your employees that they really do need to wash their hands. So that might be one way in which you can really impress upon your employees the need to wash your hands. Then if you would repeat it after they have washed their hands and really consciously tried to avoid any type of cross-contamination, see if there's a difference. Now, I think that I'm not going to get too much into microbiology at all, but there are bacteria and then there are pathological bacteria. And the real concern that we have in food handling, as far as I'm concerned, is the pathological bacteria. And so understanding how bacteria grow and what the conditions are necessary for them to grow is essential for us in our food handling. What are the requirements for the growth of bacteria? What do you need? We'll test. We'll have a little test here.
Moisture?
Okay, you need to have water. You need to have a moist environment where they're going to grow. What else is important? Temperature? Yes, okay. Moisture and temperature. What else is needed? Food. So we've got to have at least those three things. Do you teach about Fat Tom? Probably not. Fat Tom is something that we talk about in terms of the 6 factors that are necessary for bacterial growth. And so fat, F-A-T, so F is food, A is the acidity, and T is time, and then Tom, T-O-M, is temperature, O is oxygen, and M is moisture. Okay? So those are the 6 items that we need to be aware of in terms of creating an environment within our food service that we can control the growth of bacteria. Have I talked with you about the importance of washing hands? Just wanted to be sure. And then physical. Hair covering. This is something that I really enforce in our kitchen, is a hair covering. And what I do and what I ask my students to do is to wear a hairnet. Not even a hat, but a hairnet that will completely confine their hair. We've talked a little bit about gloves as a way in which to avoid cross-contamination. Is that something that you are accustomed to when you're working with food, to use gloves?
No.
At home? No. When you are in quantity food production, working in a hospital environment, do you do that then?
We do not work there.
This is, I think, a very important thing to talk about. In the state of California, they follow a national law that's referred to as the Food Code. But they do not require the use of gloves in handling food, which I am rather shocked at. What they do require is that you wash your hands just prior to the handling of food. I have some pictures of a chef who is mixing a salad with his bare hands. Doesn't do a lot for me in terms of feeling confident that that food is going to be safe to eat, particularly if it's going to sit for just a little while. The use of gloves, even though it's not required, is something that I require of my students to do that. Now, as far as chemical contamination is concerned, there are numerous horror stories of individuals who have used chemicals as an ingredient in recipes for the simple reason that chemicals were stored in adjacent areas to where food was stored. And so an important regulation that I think I would want to put into my food service is that I'm going to store chemicals away from where I'm storing food to make certain that there is no possibility of those items being used as ingredients. And then the microbial time and temperature relationships. What are the World Health Organization standards, or what are the Romanian standards as far as assurance of food safety? They're pretty universal. I don't know that there's anything that is special about, that would be different from one continent to another as far as food safety is concerned. So World Health Organization standards that I have seen are congruent, the same as the kind of standards that I have seen in other parts of the world. And so these standards, remember a week ago we started out talking about quality standards, and I've asked you to make a list of quality standards, things that you can answer yes and no to as to whether or not quality is present in that environment. And the same is going to be true as it relates to food safety and sanitation. And so a very important role that we are going to have to follow then is to teach our employees. I'm probably say that another 20 times before the end of the day. But not only teach, but assure that the employees are following the guidelines that have been established. But once you have communicated the requirements, your requirements, the local requirements, the country requirements, as far as food safety is concerned, you need to monitor. And there's a saying in management that whatever you monitor is the thing that's going to get done. If you don't monitor, it probably won't be done. It probably is looked at as something that is not important. So, as managers, we need to monitor what our employees are doing and the way in which they are performing their job. And so we need to retrain employees on at least an annual basis, if not every 6 months or even every quarter, to make certain that they are remembering. And what this is doing is implanting in their mind the idea that you are watching what they're doing, and it is important that you follow these standards. And then on an annual or semi-annual basis at the employee evaluation, I think this is a very good factor to talk about, is to the extent to which they are meeting requirements as far as food safety is concerned. Have you ever eaten spoiled food? Yes. When we talk about food spoilage, we're talking about food that is really unfit for human consumption. And so some criteria that we could use to evaluate whether a food product is fit for consumption is, how is it in terms of its ripeness or its maturity? Is it at maturity? Is it before maturity? Or is it after maturity? And so that's what we're going to really look for in terms of this, is how long has it been since this has been just at the peak of appropriateness as far as eating is concerned. Well, this brings me up to a question along this line, is once food has been prepared and you have leftover food and you put it in the refrigerator, how long can it safely stay in the refrigerator? Meats, vegetables? I'm sorry?
Depends on the food.
It depends on the food, okay. Can you give me an example of a food?
Bananas.
Bananas, okay. Would we refrigerate those? Probably not. Will you give me an example of a food that we refrigerate? Okay, meat, okay.
Dairies, milk.
Oh, milk, okay.
Milk.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Okay. How long can you safely hold milk in the refrigerator? A week. 7 days. And that typically is the standard for any food that you put into a refrigerator. You all know what a refrigerator is. In my home, anyway, a refrigerator is a place that you store food until you throw it away. And so my wife very faithfully, every Friday, will go through the refrigerator and throwing away all the leftovers that we've accumulated over the week. So even if we had used it on Wednesday night, it's gone on Friday. So don't let your refrigerator be just a storage spot where you're going to hold it until you throw it away, but use it carefully and safely so that food will be maintained at highest quality, so as you use it again, that there will not be any foodborne illness as a result of that. Unfitness or fitness, let's look at it from the positive side, also has to do with freedom from pollution. Is there any pollution that we can get into our food? I'm sorry? Pesticides. Okay, pesticides would be a good example of that. But what about even in the refrigerator? Can there be pollution in a closed environment like that, or even just in the kitchen? Pollution could take the form of exposure to water that is not clean, that is unfit for human consumption, and so thus it too would be contaminated. Certainly the pesticide point that you brought up is a very, very good thing. Let's talk about pesticides in terms of, and we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but what about insecticides that would be used in a kitchen environment? Can you just use anything? Can you use any product that's safe, that has been on the market for control of pests? Can you use that in the kitchen? No. There are special chemicals that are used to control insects, and in our area anyway, those have to be applied by a licensed individual who does that kind of work rather than us trying to do it ourselves. The third criterion is freedom from objectionable chemical or physical changes. Well, that is going to be part of the decay that occurs after maturity. But what is an example? Is there a chemical change? I mean, this was something that I saw in the book. But as I'm thinking about it, is there an undesirable chemical change that occurs in food as it sits in a refrigerator?
Fermentation.
I'm sorry? Oh, fermentation? Yeah, okay. That's a good example, an excellent example, actually. Thank you. And then the physical changes that occur even with additional maturity and just sitting in the refrigerator. I had an apple for part of my lunch today, and the apple was in just a nice little refrigerator, but the apple was frozen. So that's a physical change that can occur in food. Is it still suitable for eating? I ate it. Will I die this afternoon as a result of that? I've never eaten a frozen apple before. But it's certainly changed the characteristic and the expectation from a mouthfeel point of view of what I would expect with an apple. So that's one of the things that, as an example of chemical and physical changes. And then food spoilage as it relates to freedom from microorganisms causing foodborne illnesses. So again, we want to protect our food to the highest extent possible. And so this protection of food begins with the purchasing process. Remember last week we talked about purchasing and the importance of clearly communicating what kinds of foods that we needed in terms of the specification. But we also have an obligation to purchase from a reliable vendor. I'm just debating whether I should tell you this story or not. The first year that my wife and I were married, we lived in a small little apartment. And in the kitchen and in the bathroom, if you pull out the drawers that were around the sink, there was earth. I mean, there was no foundation, no concrete, no wood, nothing but dirt. And there were cockroaches that lived in that dirt. And so we shared our apartment with cockroaches. They did not pay rent, they did not bring food, but we nevertheless shared our apartment with them. We complained about that to the owners, two old ladies. They said, no problem. What's happening is that you are bringing those cockroaches home from the grocery store.
So it was your fault.
Oh, yes, it was my fault. It was definitely my fault. Because they come home in the grocery bags or in the boxes. Well, I have heard of that, but I'm not going to tolerate that kind of behavior on the part of the roaches, to come home with me in the grocery bags. If I was buying food from an unreputable food distributor, it could very well be that I am getting product that has insect contamination. But it also is possible that I am getting products that are in cartons or cans that are dented, that have perforations in them so that insects can get in and continue to live on the products that are there. So a reputable, approved supplier is critical. And so who is going to approve or license or otherwise determine whether or not this vendor is reputable or not. A health inspector is a very good way to do that. But I think that we also have an obligation as a food systems manager to go to the actual location where the food is being assembled for delivery to our facility to see under what conditions that food is kept. And are these suppliers giving us food that is still within the date before it needs to be pulled? And so that is another factor that I think we'll talk about that in just a little bit as well. But the reputable supplier is going to give us more than likely the very best quality within what we're wanting as far as our specification is concerned. We also want to make certain that if this is a reputable supplier, at what temperature is food being delivered? So if you're buying frozen food, at what temperature is that food being brought into you? Do you know what the appropriate temperature is for frozen food? Frozen. Mm-hmm.
I want to give the answer instead of them. So it's a minus. It's a minus. Minus 12, it's okay.
Minus 12 would be appropriate, I think, as far as delivery is concerned. But as far as storage, once it comes in, it needs to be at about minus 18. But minus 12, you're going to get some increase in temperature as the food is distributed. But the trucks that are used to deliver the food should be frozen or refrigerated or dry. And there are trucks that are on the road that have all three of these conditions available to them so that food is maintained at the highest level possible. And so, as far as receiving standards for food quality, I am just looking at cold food and not frozen food. And we'll talk about that for a moment. That should come in at least at 5 degrees C to make certain that the quality is there and that you're not going to get microbial growth. And then if you have hot food delivered, and I was racking my brain as to what hot food do I have delivered to my food service? Anything? I know I can go to the grocery store at home and buy a chicken that's already cooked, and it's still hot, and it just stays there in the shelf of the grocery store. But, is that going to improve its quality by sitting there for a number of hours at a higher temperature? I don't think so. I don't think that's the way that I would buy food for home, nor would be the way that I would buy it for my food service. So anyway, hot food should be delivered at 57 degrees or warmer. But again, as we were talking about the other day, as we were talking about food distribution particularly, it's very possible that with a heat retention system, we're going to see continued cooking of that food product. And so the quality is not going to remain with us for very long. So as we receive product, we need to not only count the amount of product that we have received, compare it with our purchase order, but we also need to look at it in terms of the packaging. Is there any evidence of any leakage? If particularly maybe a frozen food product, and there's evidence that the product has leaked, what's that going to tell you? You're going to accept that product? You're going to accept that case? No. Reject it. Send it back. Because it has been put through temperature stress, which means that it has thawed, leaked, and then has been refrozen again. Not appropriate. And then expired packages as well. How long can you keep canned goods? Do you follow the pull date on foods? Because I have seen almost everything that I have seen in the grocery store here has a manufacture date and a pull date. Do you pay any attention to those?
Yes.
Good. Good. And then, in terms of product quality, what are we looking at? Let's take, for example, fresh fruits and vegetables. What about color? What are we looking for? We could also include fish and meat in this as well. Are we looking for limp, dull-colored product? Looking for vibrant colors? That tells us something, it tells us a lot about the freshness of the product and the quality that's going to be delivered for our customer. So the texture, we want crispness. We want, like in terms of meat, we want to make certain that it has some resilience to it, that it will, as you touch it, it will spring back rather than keeping a hole in it as where you have touched it. And then the smell, the odor of the fish. Does it, like for fish, does it smell like a fish? If it smells like a fish, it's a fish, but we probably want to avoid that because it is a sign that it's an older food product. So we have received, we have stored. We're going to come back and talk a little bit more about storage in just a little while. But in order to maintain a sanitary environment, one of the things that is critical is to sanitize your work surfaces before you begin food production. Is that something that you normally do? Yes. That's good. That is very good. So a solution of 50 parts per million of chlorine in a bucket of hot water will do the job as far as the sanitizing of the work surface. And then you store the towels that you have used in sanitizing those surfaces in the sanitizing solution. Do not use those towels for any other purpose, such as wiping up a spill on the floor or wiping up a spill that you had on the work surface, or for cleaning windows, or for doing anything else. It is only used for sanitizing the work surface. Have you ever considered the possibility of food sabotage? Is that something you stay awake at night worrying about? Is that a danger? Is that something that we as food service managers and directors really need to be concerned about? I think that it is. We need to monitor what is happening because it may be done deliberately or it may be done as an accident. But in any event, we don't want the consequences of this to occur. I related to you last week about the foodborne illness outbreak that happened in Oregon State. Do you remember that story? There are enough people here that were new that were not here, and I think I may tell it again, because this was a deliberate act on the part of a group of people to contaminate the food as served in a restaurant, particularly the salad bar. And remember, this group of people was a semi-religious kind of a group that wanted to take over the whole area of the state of Oregon, not the whole state, but the county. And so on the day before election, they went to all of the food services in the city and the county with contaminating factors that went into all the products of the salad bar. So the next day was election day and everybody was sick. And so the people who had perpetrated this sabotage, they went to the polls and they voted themselves in as being the ones in charge of the county. Well, it was a good try, but it did not work because there were enough people that had pre-voted and enough people that did not get sick, that did not go out to eat, that thankfully they did not get in control of the county. But that is an example of food sabotage. But it's possible that it could be for any other political or non-political reason that you're going to have possible problems. So anytime that we allow the customer to interact with the food, we have this possibility. And so this is another area that we need to monitor very carefully to assure that, as far as possible, we're not going to see food sabotage. How do we protect food from customers to begin with? Particularly food that would be on a salad bar, or food where they are doing self-service. What are the obligations that we have to keep that food safe? Have you ever used a sneeze guard? A sneeze guard. A glass that's between your mouth and your nose and the food. They're everywhere.
Not here.
Not here? Oh. But this is a good safety mechanism to make certain that food is protected. But it's amazing what customers will do to get around that sneeze guard. They will reach down and they will look and pull out what they want. So it's of no value at all. And then there are children that will go and play in the food. I have seen that, and my wife is much worse than I am in terms of cringing at that kind of behavior on the part of children, because she's probably more concerned about bacterial contamination than even I am, and I think that I'm pretty strict. But she's very, very strict. So sneeze guards or protection like that is one way in which we can do it. But having the food served in the kitchen and brought out and served to you at your place is probably the safest manner of protecting the food, so that we don't get involved in any kind of food sabotage situation. I know at our university, almost all of the food is self-serve. So all of the food is subject to contamination. But again, we don't have serious foodborne illness problems. I'm not aware that we have any, but the potential is still there, and I think that we need to be very careful about that. Another area that we need to be concerned about, as we talked about in the global issues, has to do with time-temperature relationships. And the danger zone. You all know about the danger zone? I'm sure that you do, yes?
Yes.
Say yes.
Yes. Thank you.
Oh, good. What is the lower level? I have 4 degrees up on the board, but is it 4 or is it 5 or is it 20 or?
4, 5.
Yeah. I tend to look on the lower side. You know, many times the standards that I've seen have varied a little bit, and over the last few years they seem to have gone up a little bit. But I'm still of the concern that I'm going to stay with the lowest possible temperature. So 4 degrees Celsius. The upper level of 74. The standard for most food is that in order to protect against pathological bacteria, you need to bring temperature of the food up to 74 degrees and hold it at least for 15 seconds. And that will then destroy much of the pathological bacteria that is concerned. I won't say all. Will it destroy everything? No. But it will help to reduce the load so that there's not the issue. So the upper level at 74, and then we can hold that food at 57 degrees. I just went through Serve Safe training with my students the first part of January. And I learned something that I cringe at, that I'm really concerned about. I have done a fair amount of special event food preparation and service. And one of the concerns that I've had is the holding of food. Preparing food and then taking it, say, to an outdoor location or to a place where there is no maintenance of heat. According to Serve Safe, our obligation as a special event provider ends at the point at which the food is delivered to the site. And that food can be left out without any heat source. Cold food can be left out without any ice or anything for up to 4 hours. That's the standard, but it doesn't make me feel happy. I'm a little concerned about that. So I think it's important that in order to really deal with risk management, we need to make certain that food is maintained at appropriate temperature, particularly in special event feeding. Because you're away from your kitchen, you're away from the normal service areas, and so as a result of that, there is potential for additional harm. Another aspect of this time-temperature relationship is the concern about getting food through the danger zone as quickly as possible. So in terms of the original heating of food or the cooking of meat or any product that is going to be a basis of foodborne illness, what would be an example of a food that is not a factor in transmission of disease through foodborne illness? I would refer you to Fat Tom. The 6 factors that are necessary for the growth of bacteria. Most foods that we are serving as part of a meal have most of those concerns in terms of moisture, oxygen, temperature, etc., etc. And so bringing the food up to the appropriate temperature of 74 degrees is done very rapidly. But what about when we are through with the food and we're going to put it away in the refrigerator? What are the standards associated with bringing it down through the danger zone from the hot level to the cold level? Well, we need to bring, according to standards, we need to bring the temperature from 74 to 22 in 2 hours. That's a fairly quick time to bring that temperature down. If you put, let's say, a meat stew into a refrigerator and it is 74 degrees, how long is it going to be before it is at 4 degrees? Any idea? Something that is very thick and it's in a big stock pot and it is going to go into the refrigerator and we're going to cover it. When is it going to be at 4 degrees? Within 6 hours? Within 24 hours? Within 36 hours? About that. About 36 hours. So if it's in a large stock pot and it was at 74 degrees, it takes a very long time for that product to get down to safe temperature. Is it following these standards? In no way is it following those standards. So what do we do in order to get that product through the danger zone as quickly as possible?
In winter, we put it outside quickly.
Put it outside?
Yes.
Okay. Like outside today?
Yes, in the winter.
Yeah, okay.
That's what I'm doing it for.
Mm-hmm. So you're going to put it in a very cold environment. An important principle is that you put it into small, shallow containers that will easily transmit that cold to the food product. But you don't always have that. You may have so much food that you would run out of those small, flat containers. And so there are some things that we can do. One would be to use an ice paddle. Have any idea what that is? It is a paddle that is made of plastic. It's hollow on the inside. You put water in that and freeze it. And then you put that into your stock pot of stew or soup or whatever and use that to stir. And in doing so, it will bring the temperature down to an appropriate level, 74 to 22, easily within 2 hours, and hopefully even sooner than that. Another way that you can do it if you don't have one of those ice paddles is to put that stock pot into a sink with ice water and stir that, and so you're going to get that reduction in temperature rather soon as well. But if we're going to take that effort to bring the temperature of the food down from 74 to 22 in 2 hours, why can't we just continue that and bring it down to 5, 4, even within 3 hours or something like that? I think that's going to be a safer way. I have some real questions about that 4 hours. It's between 22 and 4. That still is an appropriate temperature for some bacterial growth. Certainly not as fast as what we would have at 37 or 40, but definitely it's a possibility that we could have continued microbial growth. So the danger zone is essential that we understand what is happening there and why the danger zone needs to be controlled so carefully. I have a recipe. Orange fruit soup. Does that sound good? It is a cold soup. It's a fruit salad kind of a thing, actually. But there is a sauce that is made with tapioca and water, and you cook that and get it so that it is making a thickened sauce. You boil that and remove it from heat, and then add sugar and a little bit of salt and some orange juice concentrate, and you stir that in, and so now you have an orange sauce. And then to that we add frozen sliced peaches, some diced orange sections, and sliced bananas, and we fold those into the sauce and we serve it. Okay? To me it sounds pretty good, but that may be different for you. It doesn't. I'm not here to sell you on orange fruit soup. What I'm here to sell you on is HACCP. What is there about this recipe that we need to be concerned about as far as microbial danger? So when we talk about hazard analysis critical control points, the first thing that we need to do with the recipe is to sit down and do a desk check. Remember, I've used that word before. in terms of standardizing recipes. We're going to do the same thing in terms of developing a HACCP plan for all of our recipes. So we're going to do a hazard analysis. And so, given this recipe, what is there as far as the ingredients that are a possible hazard from the point of view of microbiological safety? The okay, all right. That is one. That's a critical control point. It's something that we need to watch. Anything else? The sugar, the salt, is that going to be a problem for anybody?
No.
The frozen orange juice. We want to make certain that that orange juice was frozen and it had remained frozen, and so that it was from a safe and reputable supplier, and that we have not subjected it to any source of microbiological damage. What about the frozen sliced peaches? Any problems there? Probably not. One thing I'd like to go back, though, and look at the procedure in the center section there after we have added the orange juice concentrate to the tapioca water mixture. We're supposed to cover and chill that tapioca water combination. Any problems there? Is there any source of contamination? Where does tapioca come from?
I'm just looking it up.
Oh, okay. Do you know what tapioca is?
Some kind of pudding type thing.
It comes from a root in the tropical areas of this world.
Cassava plant.
Cassava, exactly. It is used as a staple in many diets in the South Seas of the Pacific, but it can also handle spores of bacteria that are there. And so I would be concerned about making certain that I had boiled that sufficiently and that I chill it quickly. Okay, so we've talked about sliced peaches, we've talked about diced orange sections. If we do not handle those orange sections appropriately with gloved hands or clean hands, that would be a source of contamination, as well as the sliced bananas. There's some possibilities there as well. So what we want to do is to make certain that we handle the bananas appropriately, that in peeling the bananas we don't do cross-contamination so that the banana flesh does not come in contact with the exterior of the banana peel. So these are some of the areas that would be referred to as a critical control point. We need to pay particular attention to these ones. What is the most critical step as far as hazard analysis in this recipe? Is it going to be the tapioca? Is it going to be the frozen peaches?
Sliced banana.
The sliced banana, I think, is going to be the biggest issue. And so what we need to do then is to make certain that as this is mixed up, that sauce that we're putting it in is already at 4 degrees or below, so that those bananas will chill quickly. So this orange fruit soup is served cold, so we want to make sure that it's served at 4 degrees or below, but not down to 0, because if we don't like frozen apples, we probably won't like frozen soup either. So I like to think in terms of HACCP as really identifying all of those critical control points, but identifying that last critical control point where you have the last opportunity to destroy, or reduce the threat of microbiological contamination. So we have identified the critical control points, and we've identified that in the recipe. And then we establish critical limits. These critical limits are based upon the time temperature standards that we were just talking about. So if a food product is kept at 57 degrees and it slips down to 55, 50 degrees, 40 degrees, what is our obligation to that food and to our customers? We have two options. One is to bring it back up to 74 degrees for 15 seconds, destroying any possible pathological bacteria. Or if it was at, say, 50 degrees, the other option that we have is to throw it away. It has been subjected to inappropriate stress as far as microbes are concerned. And so in order to follow our HACCP standards, we need to do one of those two items, of those actions. And so at each step, a critical limit is going to involve how much time has elapsed from going to 57 down to 22. If it has not been met, again, you'll have the option of bringing it back up to 74 for 15 seconds or throwing it away. Another element of the critical limits is going to have to do with the receiving process. How long has frozen food and chilled food been out at room temperature before it is put back into appropriate storage? These are going to be critical control limits as well. So at each step in the recipe, we need to identify not only the critical control point, but what we're going to do if that control point is putting that food in jeopardy. So we need to take appropriate action, either bringing it up to temperature or throwing it away. Now, we have here a refrigerated soup, and it has been subjected to microbiological stress. What are we going to do to make certain that this product is going to continue to be safe? Are we going to bring it up to 74 degrees for 15 seconds? You pretty well destroy the food. Have you ever had boiled bananas before? You're about ready to if you do that as an option. So I think that if it has been subjected to a serious problem, that you would throw it away. Yeah. Now, it can remain at room temperature for up to 4 hours. That's the standard. And so if it exceeds that, you've got to take corrective action. And we just indicated that we would throw it away. Can you imagine any kind of a situation where we would allow soup like this to sit out at room temperature for 4 hours? I have a hard time with that myself. If it happens, I'm not doing my job. My cooks are not doing their job. And so we really need to go back to the classroom and have some really serious discussion about the importance of keeping food in a safe environment. Otherwise, we are not doing the work that we should be doing. The fourth step in HACCP is to establish monitoring procedures. So this is just kind of what I was talking about. How are we going to monitor? The cooks, the chef, the food service director, all of us know about the importance of food safety, but how are we going to really monitor that? Well, part of it is going to be just eye contact with the food that's been out there for too long. But there are other factors that need to come into play here as well. And some recipes may get to the point where we actually have to write down what the temperature of the food was at each step to make certain that we are indeed monitoring what has happened at that process. Remember last week we were talking about the ready food system and the fact that in a ready food system we have cook chill or cook freeze. And what we're doing there is preparing a large quantity for inventory. So it may last for up to 6 weeks. Is it important that we maintain records for a cook chill system that document the fact that we have brought that food product up to 74 degrees for at least 15 seconds so that if there is a problem, we can go back to our records and show that that temperature was reached. But that may mean that we failed in another area in terms of meeting our obligation. So each area we need to monitor the appropriate temperatures that are essential for microbiological safety. Then we need to also include corrective action. So we were talking a little bit about this, but let's talk about it a little bit more. If we find that a standard has not been met, we need to take corrective action. So the monitoring process and the control points really come into play here because as we establish the critical control points and establishing the monitoring process, we are then going to say, if that has not been achieved, what are we going to do about it? And so as we monitor, that is going to lead us then to actually take corrective action. Bring it back up to 74 or to throw it away. Those are about the only two options that we have. So if we have a HACCP plan for this recipe, we're going to want to monitor the temperature of the water. We want to make certain that the tapioca is of high quality. We want to make certain that the sauce is brought down to a temperature of at least 5 degrees, if not 4. And then as we fold in the peaches, the oranges, and the banana, we want to make certain that the banana is taken care of so it is not contaminating or cross-contaminating the product. And we're going to keep it at 4 degrees or below until service. And then as it's served, we're going to maintain that temperature. Number 6, we've got to establish a verification procedure. And that is, are we doing what we're saying we're doing? Can we verify that these procedures were followed? And so that's where records are going to be important in our process. And so in order to maintain records, we've got to have a record-keeping system in place. And so that the food inspector, when they come to our facility, can see that we have a system in place like this that is assuring the microbiological safety of the food. I read in preparation for today the fact that in some jurisdictions, the food inspector is not going to be so concerned about other aspects of the cleanliness of the kitchen, etc. But as long as you have HACCP, that's what they're going to really emphasize. I'm of an opinion that I still would like the sanitarian to take care of the environmental issues as well as the microbiological safety. Because if it looks dirty, it's dirty. Yeah. We've talked all the way around about cross-contamination. And so this is something that we need to make certain that we are monitoring and taking care of. in that we don't want to store ready-to-eat foods below raw meats, because as raw meats drip, it can contaminate food that is stored beneath it, and if it's ready-to-eat food, it probably is not going to go through bringing it up all the way to appropriate temperature, but it should be. Cutting boards used for both raw and cooked meats and vegetables. So you have one for raw, one for cooked, and that you label them in such a way that there's no question as to what you're dealing with there. And then cross-contamination as well as handling raw meat, and then without washing your hands, handling the cooked meat. We need to make a correction there. Either 5-step process or cut out one of the steps. I would prefer that we say it's a 5-step process, because I don't want to cut out any of the processes. So when we talk about ware washing, we're talking about dishes, we're talking about flatware, we're talking about glasses and crystal, we're talking about pots and pans. All of these are going to be cleaned and sanitized in a very similar way. The first step is going to be scraping any of the large particles of food off of the plate. And we'll use the plate as an example. So removing any of the food that has been left from service. Then we're going to do a pre-wash, and then followed by a wash. And this wash is going to be one with detergent, with an agent to remove the fats, the oils, and the protein from the surface of the dish. Then we're going to rinse it, completely removing any food particles, completely removing any signs of detergent, and it's going to go then into that rinse, and then a final rinse. And the final rinse is a sanitizing rinse that will be one of two approaches. One is a hot water bath at 82 degrees centigrade for at least 10 seconds, or a chemical sanitizer like chlorine that would be put over the surface of the dish. Of the two options, I really prefer the hot water option because I don't like that free chlorine or high concentrations of chlorine on the surface of the dish that is going to help to deteriorate that dish over a long period of time. And at home we have our dishes have a very colorful design of tulips all the way around it. And we have had these for 35 years that we use on a daily basis. Every day it's like new, fresh, a new set of china. But in that 35 years, that color has not deteriorated. But we do it in a dishwasher with very harsh, strong chemicals. And so what I'm saying is I'm going against what I just told you, that over time the harsh chlorine could help to destroy. But I think, when you're dealing with a quality product or a very inexpensive product, you can see a reduction in the quality of the product, like the dish. What we're talking about in this process specifically is mechanical dishwashing. But the same principles would be followed if we were using hand washing as well. So if we do hand washing, it's going to be just a little bit different in that we are going to rinse, scrape, and soak utensils, the pre-wash, wash in water at least 43 degrees C, rinse to remove any food particles that remain and any detergent, and then sanitize in that third sink for at least 30 seconds at 77 degrees C. Now remember, in the hot water we were at what temperature? What was the sanitizing temperature in the mechanical dishwashing environment? 82? For 10 seconds. In this environment where we're doing it by hand, it's 77 degrees for 30 seconds. A good illustration of time-temperature relationships that are necessary to take care of any of the bacteria that are of concern. And then the last principle is, I think, a very important one, and that is let the utensils air dry rather than using a towel to dry them. And that's one of the real reasons that I like the hot water sanitizing method as opposed to the chlorine method, which is typically at a much lower temperature, that it doesn't get hot enough to help the water to evaporate, and so it takes longer for the water to evaporate when we have used a chemical sanitizer. So you need to know this so that as you design kitchens and as you work with your employees, that they are handling this process appropriately. Now, as we get down toward the end of this, one of the responsibilities that we have as managers is to maintain the entire environment as clean as possible. And so this means that we need to delegate the cleaning to all of the employees in the kitchen. And so we need to establish a master cleaning schedule. Some things need to be cleaned at the end of every meal. Some things need to be cleaned at the end of every day. Some things can be cleaned at the end of every week. But so that is our role as an expert in the area of foodborne illness and sanitation, so that we can maintain that safe environment. So we're going to tell them what should be cleaned, who is responsible for that cleaning, when it should be cleaned, and how it should be cleaned. So this means that we will need to have a procedure that will be available to all of our employees, telling them how to do the cleaning. You know, it's easy to take a wet rag and a wet towel and just go over the surface of it, but is it really clean? We all know, no, it's not. Then we again need to make certain that the employees are trained on the mechanics of this cleaning schedule. One of the problems that we can often run into here is that individuals will say, I don't have enough time to clean. It's time for me to go. Goodbye. And so as a result of that, they tend to put it off. But what we need to do is to make certain that we build into their schedule time for cleaning every day at the end of the shift and throughout the shift, actually. Then our responsibility as a manager is to monitor that cleaning program to make certain that it is actually being done. So on Wednesday, we're going to talk a little bit about employee monitoring what they do and making certain that they do it. And so we're going to document in the event that they're not doing it, document that they're not doing it, and we're going to take corrective action from an employee point of view to make certain that they do it. But again, if we're monitoring, that typically communicates to the customer that we're serious about what we are doing and that they need to indeed follow. Okay, the end. I have a case study that I would like for you to break up into smaller groups and deal with this problem that we have. So you are monitoring Clara. Clara is a new employee. She's a prep cook. And you're monitoring to see how she cleaned and sanitized her work area. She wiped it down with a towel. Clara, I forgot the C there. Sorry. Clara put the towel in the bucket of sanitizing solution to soak while she butterflied some pork chops. I really need to know how to spell. On the cutting board. So using the same towel, she wiped down the board. Then she chopped some onions and sauteed them in a large stock pot. While the onions were sauteing, Clara wiped the board a third time with the same towel. Did Clara do anything wrong? You are the manager and you are watching Clara. What are you going to include in your in-service training over the next little while for Clara so that she will do it right? Okay? So I'd like for you to get into groups of 3 or 4 and to talk about that, the very specific things that Clara did incorrectly. And correctly. I don't think we need to look just at the negative, but we need to look at anything, if at all, that is there that is positive. Okay? I'll give you just a few minutes to do that, and then we'll have a little bit of a report as to what you have found. I'm going to tell you a story here for a second before we go up any further. I don't have an awful lot of time, but I've been watching a little bit of National Geographic Wild channel on television, and I saw something yesterday that just about turned my stomach. It was a situation in a farm environment where mice had infiltrated everything. And they opened a door, and it was as if there was a flood of water coming out of that area behind it, but it was mice. And I mean, they were that tall, just crawling on one another, trying to get out of that. I have never, ever seen anything like that before. That is an example of not integrated pest management. We need to stop those kinds of numbers. And so we need to deny pests access to the operation. How are we going to do that? Where do pests get in? Let's first of all identify the kind of pests we're talking about. Certainly rats and mice, creepy crawly insects, spiders, that kind of thing, things I don't like to deal with. How are we going to keep those out? Flies, this would be another one. How much space does it take for a mouse to get into a storeroom? Any idea?
Very small.
Very, very small. Just a coin-sized amount of space they can get their way through. Likewise with a rat. It's just a little bit larger, but still. So what we need to do is to make certain that those areas are sealed. And one way in which we can do that is to use some caulking to fill that in. Windows and doors need to have screens or some other means of keeping those insects and pests out. And an effective way to do it, and I don't know if you do this here, is with the use of an air screen or an air curtain. You're familiar with those, in which there is a sheet of air that is forced down over the opening of a door. And what happens is that it creates a great deal of turbulence, and flies will not go through that because of the high turbulence of the air that is occurring there. Very, very effective, but you don't have the process of having to open a screen door. And the problem with a screen door is that flies can get through a screen door when it's open just as well. I mean, it's not a guarantee that you're going to keep them all out. So that's one way in which we can deny pest access to the operation. Deny pest food, water, and a nesting place. That's what happened in this situation that I saw on television. It was a perfect nesting place. And they had food, they had corn that was there that the mice were eating. They had access to water. And so by keeping the area clean is probably is the way to deny pests a nesting place. I was reading, I think, in this book about, or maybe it was the textbook, but nevertheless, about a supervisor monitoring the cleanliness around the dishwasher. And under the dishwasher were particles of food. There was flatware that had been there for an extended period of time. evidence to show that the person who's doing the mopping of the floor, housekeeping, was not doing their job. They want to do as little as possible to get out as quickly as possible. But we really need to enforce our regulations in terms of how we're going to deal with insects and mice and other rodents. And so probably the best example, the best thing that we can do is to work with a licensed pest control specialist to eliminate pests that enter. You can keep a place as clean as you can, but still pests are going to be there. So you need to have a very active program to eradicate these pests. In our kitchen, in our department, we have a weekly individual who comes in who's a licensed pest control specialist, just to make certain that we don't have anything. Probably the biggest problem that we've had is ants. And they're coming in looking for water primarily, and they can get in where you would think that they would not be able to get in. In the next hour, I'll show you our kitchen and let you take a look at that. And then the last thing that we will talk about is maintenance. In terms of preventive maintenance particularly, keeping your equipment in good working order. If you do that, the length of time that equipment is going to serve you is going to be a significant amount of time. And so every effort that you put forth in terms of preventive maintenance is going to pay for itself time and time again. What I would like to have happen for the next little while, I have said, I think 20 minutes. You are a manager in a food service, and what I would like for you to do is, along with what we have been doing consistently through last week, I want to begin this week, but to give you some time in class to write as many quality standards as you can affecting the sanitation of the facility. Understand what I'm saying? Another way of thinking about it is you are the food inspector. What are you going to look for when you enter the premise of a food service? What are you going to look for? So if you know what the sanitarian is going to be looking for, that's what you need to put your emphasis in terms of control. Okay? So again, I don't mind if you work in groups, but let's take about 20 minutes or so. And then what I would like to do is to go around the room and each one of you give one standard that you would follow. And if the other groups don't have that standard, then you can add that to your list. And then we'll go to the next one and give another one. And if you have it, fine. If not, add it to your list. So what I'm hoping is that by the end of this exercise, that you will have quite an extensive list of things that are essential to be monitored in your sanitation and safety program.